The challenge was, once WW2 ended, we ran into a situation where the strategic landscape had changed. So now it was really about geostrategic issues, deterrence and containment as the kind of prevailing doctrine. And the challenges that we had at that point was, how do you start peering inside of what we call denied territory, or denied terrain? So you had basically 11 time zones, you had China, you had, you know, the Iron Curtain that surrounded these things. So our challenge at the time was, how do you look up inside and understand their capabilities and intent? And so the real breakthroughs that happened were things like the U-2, the SR-71, Corona as a satellite system. These things were basically put up so we could look into the territory, start counting the missiles, the bombers, understand that, and then also trying to get into the minds of leadership to understand strategic intent where we're going. So it's capabilities and intent as we started doing this. So a lot of capabilities that were developed and a lot of things that we recognize as the intel community today came out of this environment. The systems, the infrastructure, the organizations, the culture, all this type of stuff. So rich history in that. The challenge that we had in 1992 when all that went away was we entered into this kind of geoeconomic world, this globalization, and we've struggled in the 90s in trying to figure out what that meant for intel and how to do that. And you know, there's a lot of debate over what's the role of intel in economics and in trade negotiations and how all that starts to play out. And there's a lot of debate over the role of human and technical disciplines in this new world. And so the 90s were really spent kind of figuring out, number one, there was a big thing that came out in 1992. It was called the Peace Dividend. And the question was, how do we take money away from the defense and intel agencies and then put it back into the civilian economy? And then the question became, how do we have it? Then we started having to do more with less. We had a lot more missions popping up, a lot more challenges, new technologies like the internet that came in. So a very trying time in the 90s. Then obviously as we hit 2000, 2001 with 9/11, that became kind of this second wave of where we're going with intelligence. And so I would argue at this point the chief challenge that we have now is really understand this kind of human terrain, what's going on out there in the world. I mean, at the end of the day, this is about, if you're combating terrorism, if you're combating a lot of these things, it's not about just technical disciplines, it's a lot more about human and human intelligence. And so that became a huge emphasis. But the innovations that have come out of this, the unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, biometrics, the stand-up of the National Geospatial Agency and the National Counterterrorism Center. So we started seeing over the last 15 years, there's a lot more emphasis on integration. Because the intel community went, if you went from this period to this period, from one being very competitive, where the story was back in the 1930s, early 1940s, that the Army and Navy each had their own SIGINT organizations. They refused to work with each other, so what they did is they divided up the week. You cover this on Tuesday, we cover this on Wednesday, we do this on Thursday. And so it was very competitive and not very cooperative. The whole idea in 1947 to stand up the CIA was to start forcing the integration. I would argue what happened though is that the CIA kind of got more involved in CIA issues versus, you know, larger community issues, and that's just the nature of that. And the debate's gone on over the years of how do you split that up. Obviously that resolved in 2004. But that has been the biggest piece. Now I would argue, as you look back, the intelligence community has gone through a series of kind of challenges and plateaus where we were challenged, we had to build up new capabilities, we succeeded, then we ramped down. Then we went through this again, we built it back up, succeeded, and then we ramped down. And we've been in the period for the last 5 years of building up. The question is, if we hit this plateau and start ramping down, what's that start to look like? And so the Office of Director of National Intelligence was stood up to really start to anticipate these issues, but also try to reimagine and reshape and create a different intelligence community. So a little bit of background on intelligence reform. If you look back, and one of the first things we did when we came in last year was to look back at all the studies that have been done on intel reform. And what's amazing is that the first study on intel reform was in 1946. Then they created the CIA, they did a study after that. There have been literally 40 studies, so one every 18 months, the blue ribbon panels, major studies on intel reform. So if you ever want a job in DC, just get on one of these panels. You can ride this probably for the next 20 years because they keep turning out these studies. The irony is that they keep saying the same things. And they come back and Congress is on board, the NSC is on board. One of the big debates has always been what's the role of the Director of Central Intelligence, which is different than the Director of the Central Intelligence Agency. The CIA had classic roles of human, and then all source analysis within that, and then the DCI was supposed to be the coordinator of the community, so they were always dual-hatted, which is always a bit of a problem. And then also, you know, how do you start, the real tension in the system is between the Director of Central Intelligence and the Office of Secretary of Defense. And because that's where the bulk of the assets are. All the other ones are smaller players compared to this. This is where the money and resources are. And then Homeland, and the other division that you've had is this whole idea of foreign and domestic intel. So you always had FBI working domestic intel, and then all the other agencies working foreign intel. So you had this very clear and neat divide during the Cold War. And then 9/11 kind of shattered that model as we go into this. So, as I was saying a little bit earlier, there have been all these studies that have come out, but they all kind of came into 4 areas. One said that if you're going to transform the intelligence community, make it more integrated and collaborative, you have to work the people and cultural issues. You have to go to things like joint duty, that the Goldwater-Nichols Act in 1984, 85 created. You have to transform the way we do collection analysis, so that's your kind of core operating model. We have to fix information sharing issues. There's a study that came out in 1960 that said we have to integrate our IT systems. At the time, we literally had 2 computers. They were already building stovepipes around them. We had to fix technology and acquisition. One concern that came up was, I think this is 1955, that said, you know, the security clearance process is bureaucratic, it's cumbersome, and it takes 15 months to get a security clearance. And now I can report that last year it was taking 18 months. So I think building inflation, we're doing pretty well. But these have been, and management issues that have come up with how we do management and budget, and then lastly, authorities and policy. The irony is we've been working these things and talking about them for over 60 years, and I would argue we've had uneven progress and episodic progress on this for several reasons. One is the inability to take the insight from these studies and turn it into strategic intent, that is, somebody's going to take ownership of it. The inability to take intent and turn it into strategy, where you actually put a plan together, and then strategy into action, where you actually put money against it, and then action into results. And so we've had breakdowns at each one of these levels. And so as we went through this, one of the first things we said is this has to be addressed. We have to get a systemic way to start addressing this and not try to get on this kind of episodic reform where we're at. So that's been the bulk of our efforts really since 2005. One of the things you start looking at, you go, you know, 60 years of studies, hundreds of billions of dollars spent over the last 60 years. Why haven't we made better progress in this? And I think it comes down to a handful of things. One is, quite frankly, it's just operations. The press of day-to-day business just gets in your way. I mean, things happen. The world does not stop while you try to fix the intel organizations and transform them. And so the claim we get from this is we just don't have time for this stuff. I think it's important, but we have real-world things going on that we have to address. The other piece of this is the complexity. There's so many interlinked issues. If you want to solve information sharing, you have to fix the security clearance piece of this, because then you have to figure out that everybody's going to have a uniform security clearance process and everybody has access to the same information. But if you want to fix that, you really got to fix the human capital issues of how you recruit people. If you want to fix that, you really got to fix the larger policy issues, because there are executive orders that say the way things are going to be done. So every time you start pulling a thread on one of these problems, it hits 4 or 5 other areas, and it makes it extremely difficult. So what happens after a while is people just give up. They say this is just too hard, and we're going to go back and work ops again. Politics is another piece. These changes threaten the existing system. The antibodies are going to come out, and you know the real motto there is, hey, you're killing the mission. You don't understand what we're doing. You're killing what we're doing. So you guys just need to knock it off and go back and do whatever you do up there. That has been a big problem, but it's not the sole problem. Another piece of this is the culture. I would argue that people just resist change in general. It's just the nature of being human. It creates stress and tension, and people react to it each time. Why are we doing this differently? It's always worked this way. You guys are really going to do more harm than you're doing good at this point once you just slow down or stop your efforts. And then lastly, authorities. Intelligence is an interagency challenge. We've got 16 agencies and 6 departments, and the authorities are often vague. Most of the people that work in the intel community answer to a department head. They don't answer to the Director of National Intelligence. And so this makes a lot of challenges. If you, at the end of the day, don't have higher fire capabilities, it makes it very difficult for people to do what you want them to do. And the response we get is, you don't have the legal authority to do what you're trying to do.